Welcome to Matters Financial and Geopolitical from the Frontier, and thank you as always for stopping by. It remains a little bit chilly here in Nairobi. Let me start with some macro thoughts. This is a chart of the South Korean won from Bloomberg, and it's interesting that it's been softening up at a time of rapprochement on the peninsula, but I think that's more a consequence of an emerging market malaise that we've seen in the last few weeks. Home thoughts. Look at these. This is a photograph of Baobab Trees at Congo Mosque Beach, and this is on the south coast, south of Mombasa. There's an estuary, a very old mosque, and these extraordinarily old baobab trees. And then I read in the Atlantic that trees that have lived for millennia are suddenly dying. Around 1500 years ago, shortly after the collapse of the Roman Empire, a baobab tree started growing in what is now Namibia. The San people would eventually name the tree Homasi, and others would call it Grootboom, after the Afrikaans word for big tree. As new empires rose and fell, Homasi continued growing as humans invented paper money, printing presses, cars, computers. Homasi sprouted new twigs, branches, and even stems, becoming a 5-trunked behemoth with a height of 32 meters and a girth to match. And then in 2004 it collapsed. The tree's demise was sudden and unexpected. In March, at the end of the rainy season, Homasi was in full bloom, but by late June its health had suddenly deteriorated. One by one its stems broke off from the gargantuan trunk and toppled. The last of them fell on New Year's Day 2005, ending 15 centuries of life. Common throughout sub-Saharan Africa, the African baobab is one of the biggest flowering plants in the world and reputedly one of the longest lived. It's also known as the upside-down tree because its bare branches look like roots, or as the monkey bread tree because of its nutritious and edible fruit. It's exceptionally long-lived, but recently several of the oldest baobabs have been dying. Homasi, for example, was part of a grove of 7 baobabs, 6 of which perished within a 2-year period. This isn't an isolated event. Of the 13 oldest known baobabs in the world, 4 have completely died in the last dozen years, and another 5 are on their way, having lost their oldest stems. These large and monumental trees, which can live for 2,000 years or more, were dying one after the other. It's sad that in our short lives, we are able to live through such an experience. The oldest tree was Patroot's team studied. The Panke baobab from Zimbabwe was more than 2,500 years old when it died in 2011. 2 other trees, Dorlands Boom in Namibia and Glencoe in South Africa, also more than 2,000 years old. Their largest and oldest stems have collapsed, but parts of them are still alive. No one can say baobabs have died off in this way in centuries past. These trees decay very quickly and leave few traces behind. But when around 70% of your 1,500 to 2,000-year-old trees died within 12 years, it certainly is not normal. It is difficult to come up with a culprit other than climate change. This is another photograph of baobabs on that beach I was describing, a Congo beach in south of Mombasa. Baobab is the common name of a genus of trees, the Adansonia. 9 species, 6 species live in the drier parts of Madagascar, 2 in mainland Africa, 1 in Australia, and 3 in India. It's the national tree of Madagascar. One of the largest and most important trees in all of where they grow, able to provide shelter in the wood. The leaves of the tree are used for making soup, and it has some medicinal purposes in some regions of Africa. Here's another photograph. This is from Agence France Presse, and then again the photograph from Congo Mosque Beach and baobabs. And what I said to Hannah, who I dropped early in the morning, to her pickup point, and I said to her, Hannah, these trees, and she knows Baobab trees because we're in Africa and we've seen them often. And I said, do you know how old they are? And she said, no. And I said, the oldest was 2,500 years old. And then I said to her, do you know how old Jesus Christ is? And then we discussed BC, obviously. And then I said, do you know how old the oldest human remains are that were discovered in Lake Turkana by Leakey? I was up there at Turkana County, not at the lake, so I'm going to go and have a look next time. And I said, I think it's over 1 million years. And then I asked her how long the universe was, and then we sort of considered how short mankind has been on this planet. But it's very sad to be that. This is home Malawi, beautiful as always. Visit Malawi. This is Lake Malawi, and I think we visited just there. And then this looked rather tempting, a star bed at Nwichi Lodge on Lake Malawi, solar-powered, winner of the 2017 Best Green Hotel. I wouldn't mind spending a night under the stars right there. Political reflections, well, we've had lots of developments. Kim Jong-un and President Trump went on a post-lunch stroll inside the grounds of the Capella Hotel. We've now discovered they've signed some document, but as I go to the podcast, the contents of that document have not been released yet. I take you back to the 30th of April this year when I said my question remains, what security guarantees can Trump provide to Kim that convince him to denuclearize? He can hardly forget what happened to Saddam Hussein and Muammar Gaddafi, both of whom met their ends after being defanged. And I was saying, the security guarantees component of this negotiation is the equivalent of threading the needle. Offering up bulletproof security guarantees is the equivalent of threading the needle. So I'm not sure what exactly is coming out of it and how they propose to embark on that journey. But it seems to me the main sticking point. Lunch looked pretty good for Trump and Kim Jong-un. Prawn cocktail, green mango kirabu with fresh octopus, Korean stuffed cucumber, beef short rib confit, potato dauphinoise, steamed broccolini, I'm not sure if that's broccoli in the plural, sweet and sour crispy pork, Yangtze fried rice, and dark chocolate tartlet ganache. Looks good. This photograph was tweeted by the Singaporean Prime Minister, and Kim Jong-un was cheered like a rock star on his arrival at Marina Bay Sands in Singapore yesterday. He also took a surprise selfie during an evening tour with Singapore's foreign minister. And it's such a contrast, isn't it, how Trump is behaving here compared to the G7. And Ian Bremmer can spot the difference. In the first photograph, Trump and Kim, second photograph, Trump and Trudeau. A fellow I follow on social media, Kinjan Jumpa, the events of the G7 summit last week and the photo ops in Singapore make one feel the world has turned upside down. And then I came across this in the Atlantic. What is the Trump doctrine? This is how a senior White House official with direct access to the president and his thinking defines it. We are America, bitch. Worth reading as well. It struck me almost immediately that this was the most acute and attitudinally honest description of the manner in which members of Trump's team and Trump himself understand their role in the world. And then I take you back to a tweet from over the weekend. Whilst we were busy building driverless cars, we ended up with a driverless world. Now, let's go on to the currency markets. Let's start with the euro dollar, which was at 117.63 before I went to do this podcast and is now at 118. Dollar index 93.72. Dollar yen is at 110.28. Swiss franc 0.9877. The pound, that's had a bounce as well, 133.82. It's up 30 ticks in a very short space of time. The Australian dollar, no doubt, is set 0.7621. That's up as well. India rupee 67.465, South Korean won 1076.96, the Real 371.01, Egyptian pound 17.828, and the rand 13.2152. So a little bit of a bounce near term, whilst I've been doing this podcast against the dollar. This is a 3-month chart of the dollar index. I'm still in no man's land about this. We got to 94.50. I'm not sure, where we go now. However, with the euro dollar, I think that's a sell on bounces like this one. We're currently at 118. My target is 114.50. UK economic data, industrial and manufacturing output plunged in April and trade deficit widened to £14 billion. The second widest deficit on record. It felt soft, it could get softer. Thomson Reuters' most shorted index has gained 25% since June 2017 versus an S&P rise of 14%. Shares and some heavily shorted stocks rallied Monday, with Tesla, Chipotle, Hertz, Avis Budget seeing strong gains. Italian bond, anyone? The volatility on 2-year Italian government bonds has exploded to 17% annualized. Go back to September 2016, and I said then if volatility spikes, positions are going to be reduced en masse, or to put it another way, and to borrow the lyrics from the Eagles Hotel California, mirrors on the ceiling, the pink champagne on ice. Gold last trading at 1298.50. I'll put up a 6-month chart and then a Brent crude chart. This is from Chi-Girl. It gives a good idea. If we come off the highs, the question is, do we fall back further or do we rebound? 14th of May, I warned about the probability of a blow-up in emerging markets. I said this is all the ingredients for baking a good old-fashioned crisis. Sub-Saharan Africa, the Washington Post has weighed in on Abiy Ahmed, pulls off an astonishing turnaround for Ethiopia. 6 months ago, Ethiopia appeared trapped in a cycle of unrest, repression, and more unrest. Stability in East Africa's largest country, with a population of more than 100 million, appeared to be crumbling, while the once booming economy was facing a debt crisis. All of this was bad news for the US, for which Ethiopia has been a key ally in combating terrorism in nearby Somalia. So it's more than worth cheering the rush of developments in Addis Ababa during the past few weeks, which signal an astonishing turnaround under a new and dynamic young leader. In the past week, the government has lifted a state of emergency, announced a major new program to partially or fully privatize state-run firms. My feeling is that was out of necessity. But nevertheless, it's a good, quick decision. Said it would finally implement a peace agreement with neighboring Eritrea that it had been stalling for 18 years. That followed the release of political prisoners and invitations to exiled dissidents and media outlets to return home. Mr. Abiy, who took office on April 2nd, has been touring the country and promising even more change. He says the constitution will be amended to apply term limits to his position, which has been occupied by only 2 other men since 1995. The immediate effect of this reconciliation campaign has been to stem ethnic unrest and is threatening to tear Ethiopia apart. Abiy, who is 41, is one of the youngest leaders in Africa, is an Oromo, a group that makes up 1/3 of Ethiopia's population. It remains to be seen whether Mr. Abiy can sustain his reform drive, which is sure to draw opposition from regime hardliners. The key question will be whether economic reforms, including the sale of shares to foreign investors in large state companies and the privatization of others, will bring in enough hard currency to allow payments of foreign debts and ease import bottlenecks. I said before, he's moving at lightning speed, which is exactly the clock speed you need if you want to be a disruptor. I think he's fused a Gladwellian and Paul Virillian philosophy of moving at tremendous speed and trying to create a virus-type effect where people get infected and can't resist you. The forces that are arranged against you are very static. That's why you've got to move with tremendous speed. When Peace is a Problem by Michaela Wrong in the New York Times, this is talking about the standoff between Ethiopia and Eritrea. And she is making the point that Isaiah, who's 72, is still at the helm, whilst his main antagonist, Meles, is gone. And that this reconciliation poses risks for Eritrea's government and how it will respond. I think for all of Isaiah's complaining about Ethiopia's refusal to honour the boundary decision, that reluctance has served him well. It has allowed his control-freak regime to keep running Eritrea along the militaristic lines that he and his movement established in the bush during the fight for independence. His government could invoke the threat of an imminent invasion to justify its refusal to implement the 1997 constitution, allow opposition parties, stage multi-party elections, or tolerate a free press. If Ethiopia does withdraw its troops from the Eritrean territory it still occupies, a key excuse for Mr. Isaiah's iron rule will be removed. Many of Badme's 15,000 people were veterans of a 1998-2000 conflict that drew comparisons to the First World War, with waves of conscripts forced to march through minefields towards Eritrean trenches, where they were cut down by machine gun fire. So that's why it's quite a sensitive place to get back. Zambia looks like foreign investors are staying away from Zambia's T-bill market, undersubscribed by 57.6%. Yields are also rising, not a good sign. I've previously alerted you to this risk, and I think President Lungu has actually run out of road. South African all shares down 2.28% year to date. It seems the Ramaphosa honeymoon period is over for the rand, which has slumped 9.5% already this quarter. It's a big slump. This is dollar rand, last trading 13.2152. Having been caught off guard here, I'm just waiting for it to base out, but I remain confident that the political risk has fundamentally shifted in the right direction. Nigerian all shares up 1.57% year to date. The Ghana Stock Exchange Index is up 16.38% year to date. Dar es Salaam, Tanzania ordered all unregistered bloggers and online forums on Monday to suspend their websites immediately or face criminal prosecution. Several sites, including the popular online discussion platform Jamii Forum, said on Monday they had temporarily shut down after the state-run Tanzania Communications Regulatory Authority warned it would take legal action against all unlicensed websites. Jamii Forums, was the equivalent of a WikiLeaks. The regulations passed in March made it compulsory for bloggers and owners of the other online forums, such as YouTube channels, to register with the government and pay up to $900 for a license. Per capita income in Tanzania is slightly below $900 a year. The Paris-based Reporters Without Borders group has said the new online content rules will kill off Tanzania's blogosphere. I did a bunch of interviews, and we filmed a bunch of presentations from TransUnion, Lee Nike, a panel discussion, and Chad Reimer as well. Take a look at these presentations if you get a chance. They're right up to date with what's going on. A trip down memory lane from President Uhuru Kenyatta today. Canada and Kenya will always keep working to build our partnerships from strength to strength, Justin Trudeau. The Kenyan unit of party Airtel Kenya's abandoned plans to merge with Telkom Kenya to take on the market-leading operator Safaricom. Airtel developed cold feet, said an industry source who declined to be named. Nairobi all shares up 4.14% so far this year, but has slipped 9.299% since closing at a record high on April 5. NSE 20 is down 10.13%. Swiss Re buys 348,504,000 ordinary shares in Britain. And of course, we've had the IFC and African Best pile in as well. Plum LLP enters into a share purchase agreement with Swiss Re. I did an interview on the occasion of the African Best investment with Dr. Benson Wairegi, who is the Chief Executive Officer of Britain. And I also interviewed George Odo of African Best about the investment that they were making.
This weekend I visited Kakuma refugee camp and attended a TEDx function. That article I wrote after that visit is linked on the website. The court issued the freezing orders following an application by the Asset Recovery Agency investigating Officer Frederick Musioki, where the suspects were paid through accounts held in nearly 10 banks. This is the NYS scandal. Banks mentioned include KCB Equity, Standard Chartered, Barclays and Cooperative Bank. Others are Stanbic, National Bank, Consolidated Bank, NIC Bank, INM Bank and Guarantee Bank. Central Bank Governor Patrick Njoroge said earlier, an unspecified number of lenders were under investigation, with the first phase focusing on tracing the recipients of the funds from the NYS and recovering the assets. A lot will depend on whether we see that actually happen. Thank you for stopping by.